Welcome to Scaling Products and Teams in an AI-focused world. I'm Alex Rosales, and I have 27 years of industry experience, including 22 at Amazon and a year and a half at Snap. I've had the opportunity to lead product, engineering, and data science for a number of AI ML-based innovations at scale, including improvements to Amazon's product search results, the introduction of the Amazon Bestseller Badge, the invention of buy it again recommendations on Amazon, and Alexa's first conversational experiences. More recently, I was the director of product inclusion at Snap, where I had the opportunity to help make Snap's products more inclusive for marginalized communities. Today, I want to share a few of the lessons that I've learned along the way about scaling products and teams in a world that is becoming more and more AI centric. So let's get started. We're going to start out by talking about how we use data-informed product strategy to scale products, how we build scalable teams, and then when we want to use AI to delight users and when it's adding unnecessary complexity. So let's start with data-informed product strategy. Let's talk about how we'll use data to inform a product strategy in order to scale products. So data has to be the foundation of your product strategy. Why is that? Well, data allows you to identify the most impactful opportunities that are aligned with your scaling objective. For example, if your scaling objective is to grow the number of monthly active users worldwide, data can help you see which regions and demographics are the biggest opportunities for growth. It's also important that you balance qualitative data with quantitative data. While data like behavioral data can tell you how people are using your product today, qualitative signals can identify opportunities that aren't showing up in your behavioral data. For example, at Snap, we use qualitative surveys to understand why certain aspects of Snap's features were driving less engagement with marginalized communities. Data is also a great way to look around corners. For example, before launching the Buy It Again feature on Amazon, I used behavioral data to identify that people were frequently reordering products, but we lacked features to help them. This led to a significant change in our roadmap and an industry-first feature. I also like to emphasize that data-informed decision-making is important because it's easy to fall into the trap of letting data drive you. You need to remember that you're in the driver's seat, and it's really easy to fall into the trap of getting overly focused on a specific piece of quantitative data, and it can drive you astray. So, for example, using the Buy It Again feature example, if I'm completely focused on my existing features and the quantitative data around those features, I might have missed that some customers were frustrated about the fact that it's hard to repeat purchases on Amazon. And so looking for qualitative data around how people are using your experience can help you make more informed decisions about how you want to scale your product. So there's no such thing as the average user. This is an important point when you're looking at large amounts of data. It can tempt us to want to look at averages instead of looking at the specific attributes of customers that we're serving or potential customers that we're serving in order to make decisions. I want to use a real world example to illustrate this. In the 1950s, the US Air Force pilots were crashing planes at an alarming rate. It turns out the cockpits were designed for the average pilot, but no one actually fit those measurements. After realizing this, the Air Force created adjustable cockpits with customizable seats and controls. It was a simple, affordable fix that solved the problem almost instantly. If we want to scale our products, we need to recognize that there's no such thing as the average user. Which takes me to this concept of inclusive product development. The key to making products inclusive is to first ask, who are you not including when considering the requirements and design of your product? And can you empathize with a wider range of customers? Because if you can, you'll gain access to a wider audience, which will naturally allow you to scale your product. Now, I won't go into a ton of detail into product inclusion in this presentation, but there are a number of resources on building inclusive products. I especially recommend the book called Build for Everyone by Annie Jean-Baptiste. I will have a link to that at the end of the presentation. So, what are a couple of the essentials for scaling your products? Well, first, it's critical to set clearly defined, measurable goals aimed at growing and scaling into the specific region or demographic that you are targeting. For example, if your objective is to expand to Spanish speaking customers, setting an objective aligned with growing DAU, such as grow DAU of Spanish speaking users from X to Y, an improvement of Z% by end of year, will allow you to better focus on achieving that goal. Once you have clearly set and a defined objective, you want to identify which features will allow you to scale toward that objective with the highest level of impact, while also taking into account the level of effort. So, for example, if we're trying to grow DAU with Spanish speaking users, we might need to consider a few things, such as AI-based language translation, support for classifying and ranking Spanish content, etc. And we'd want to then look at the amount of effort involved in each of those and the potential impact that they can bring in order to prioritize the features that we want to build in order to scale our product. So, what are some of the common pitfalls when scaling products? Well, one of them is scaling before you've achieved product market fit. For example, you might be trying to expand your product into a new market without actually having validated your product with users, or you're trying to scale the team or the infrastructure too quickly and you haven't validated whether or not the product is actually going to bring value. Another trap is scaling too quickly without building a scalable architecture. Make sure you work closely with engineering to ensure that your plans for scaling are aligned with architectural plans. Is the architecture set up to scale to the level of growth that you're aiming for with your new objectives? Another failure mode is growing at the expense of a quality user experience. This one is all too common. Make sure you have guardrails in your objectives to ensure that a quality bar is being maintained while scaling your product. So, for example, ensure you have a quality objective that mirrors your growth objective. So, in the example of expanding into a Spanish language market, you would probably also want to set a goal to ensure that the quality of the experience is the same or better than it is in the existing markets or demographics that you had targeted. And then also, it's tempting to want to focus on vanity metrics like traffic or number of users or downloads for your app, but that can mask unsustainable growth strategies. You want to make sure that you temper this with a focus on core metrics that ensure that you're retaining customers, that customers are still engaging, and ultimately that you're able to drive revenue to sustain your growth. So it takes me to the next section, which is building scalable teams. In order to scale products, we also have to be able to scale our teams to support that growth. So the three ingredients to success, if you want to achieve anything, and those are you need to have a system, you need to have accountability, and you need to have support. And when it comes to execution and building scalable teams, your job as a product manager is to make sure all three of these are in place. The following slides, I'm going to give you a few ways that you can provide this for your teams. So one of the considerations is to start small and scale incrementally. Start as small as possible. You ideally want to have this minimally effective team that can move quickly. If you add too many people to the team early on, you can slow yourself down. You may need to iterate on your goals to ensure that you can start with a small team. For example, starting with an MVP to test out a particular growth area. Starting small also allows you to minimize bottlenecks, which leads to the next point. You want to identify single-threaded leaders and give them autonomy to make decisions. Give them an area of ownership and the authority to make decisions autonomously. By distributing decision making, that allows you to scale and not be the bottleneck. And then you want to make sure that you use shared goals as guardrails so that leaders stay aligned while also operating independently and are able to move fast. So essentially, you want to have small, fast moving teams that have very clearly defined single threaded leaders that have the autonomy to make decisions. So decision making is distributed, and that you have shared goals that keep people aligned And make sure that you have guardrails as well so that you don't have to micromanage and ensure that people are operating independently, moving fast while not harming your core metrics. So, how do you foster collaboration across various functions? Well, first off, it's helpful to create swim lanes, to define roles and responsibilities upfront, to drive accountability, reduce conflicts, and minimize duplication of effort. You might want to use a framework like RACI to make sure everyone knows who is responsible, accountable, consulted, and who is informed for a given set of deliverables. This way, you're not duplicating effort and that you're reducing the chance for conflict across individuals working on somewhat overlapping tasks. You want to also resist the temptation to control the flow of information. Don't become a bottleneck. Allow information to flow freely so the team can support themselves. You can utilize collaboration tools such as Confluence or Slack, and make sure to also leverage documentation so that people can serve themselves and not need to rely on you or other individuals in order to be unblocked. You also want to create accountability. This is very important. If you want to be able to distribute ownership and not be the bottleneck of getting things done, it's important to push accountability down and create a cadence of accountability weekly, monthly, with objective review meetings. You want to make sure that any commitments that you get from others come with a date for delivery or a date for a date. A plan without a date is not a plan. These meetings can also be a place to raise misalignments that might arise while executing on the project. So, if you want to foster collaboration across functions, it's important to be very clear about who owns what, make sure you have transparency of communication, and then make sure that you have accountability so that commitments are being held and that your plan is a real plan that has dates. One of the biggest challenges as a team scales is decision making. And that decision making can become bottlenecked when there is misalignment. And without prompt escalation of that misalignment, the default resolution mechanism becomes exhaustion, which means that the person with the most stamina ends up winning. So, to make the escalation process efficient, I recommend having a written template that frames the issue at hand with both parties' perspectives and recommendations. That way, the decision maker can evaluate both sides thoroughly before making a decision. If the decision has to be done in a meeting, commit to making the decision in that meeting. You don't want to get into a situation where conflict is happening and it's getting resolved through exhaustion, through debate, endless debate. You want to have the ability for people to feel safe, to escalate, and to do so quickly. So now let's talk about when is it good to use AI. And since we're now living in a world where there is so much attention on I want to talk about when it makes sense to integrate AI into your roadmap and when to avoid it due to the potential cost or unnecessary complexity. So, what are some of the considerations here? Well, first, it's really important to ask yourself, what problem are you trying to solve? Are you trying to solve a real problem or are you adding needless complexity? It can be tempting to use AI to solve a problem that might be better handled with less sophisticated means. For example, recently, you might have seen this where Spotify revamped its annual Wrapped feature by integrating AI generated elements, including an AI podcast that summarized user habits. The feature was poorly received, a lot of complaints around it. People cited lack of depth and personal touch that previous versions brought. And so this could have been avoided by not investing in this AI generated feature. And it's possible that maybe they'll work on getting it to be feel more personal, or they might just go back to the way that things were before. But the key is that they didn't validate whether it was actually a problem that needed to be solved by customers. It seemed more like maybe they were just trying to find a way to use AI. This leads me to my next point. Focus on features that will delight customers. So AI is great at simplifying complex tasks for users. How can you use it to reduce friction in their lives? How can you use AI to fulfill something that the user actually needs? So, a great example of an AI feature that simplifies complex tasks are image editing apps that remove unwanted objects from photos using AI. Very simple implementation and gets rid of something that is challenging for users. Another example that we're all familiar with is ChatGPT that uses natural language to enable productivity, creativity, and learning. That's on the other level of complexity spectrum. A lot of complexity with ChatGPT, but it's also bringing a lot of value. So if there's a lot of complexity in the AI that you're implementing, there needs to be a commensurate amount of value being offered to your customers. And then a very important point is kind of related to all of this, which is you need to make sure that you can test your AI implementation thoroughly. Make sure you have the budget and the ability to test thoroughly. Since AI is often a black box, the cost is often much more than what it costs to implement it. You also need to have extensive testing to ensure that you're not harming users. For example, in December of 2021, Snapchat released an AI generated year in review that had AI generated captions that were, on some occasions, unfortunately offensive to users. Ended up being rolled back the next year in favor of a previous version that allows the product team to have better control over the captions. So the complexity of the AI didn't give us the value that we wanted. And it made more sense to go with a simpler solution where we had more control over it and less likely to easier to test and less likely to cause issues for users. So, how can you use test and learn for your AI projects to minimize investing too heavily before you find product market fit? So first, you want to validate quickly. Um, you want to make sure you have a way to test through some sort of prototyping and A/B testing. So how do you do this? You want to find low cost, low risk ways to test your ideas. So, for example, at Amazon, before I'd introduce a new AI or ML approach to search, I'd start with a small set of queries that I would be able to inspect the AI results manually for, right? So maybe 100 queries that produce millions of hits of traffic a day. That means I can look at the results for 100 queries pretty easily. But once I've done that, it's going to impact millions of users. So I can get enough signal in my A/B test. And then once that test, if that test succeeds, then you can scale up to a larger set of users via more frequently used queries through a bigger, set of queries. So essentially, if you can find a way to test your approach with a much smaller data set that can have bigger impact, that might be one way to be able to reduce the testing and evaluation cost, as well as the implementation cost to prototype and test your new idea. Now, once you've validated the idea and you have a sense of what the potential return on investment is through A/B testing, you want to make sure it warrants the additional complexity to keep the system running. If it costs just as much to keep the models trained and to conduct safety testing as it is the revenue being generated, is it really worth the investment? So you want to be mindful of how much is it going to cost you to keep testing for safety and keeping the models trained and updated, because it's not a one-time cost. There's an ongoing maintenance and testing that needs to be done. So what are some of the common pitfalls with AI? One of them is over engineering. Are you over engineering and not getting enough user value, right? So, for example, uh, you know, using AI to automatically recommend responses to social media posts when users would prefer to write their own messages to maintain authenticity. You've probably seen this on some social media platforms recommending things to reply to users. You know, who wants to do that? It doesn't feel personal, right? Um, Another one is making sure that, or failing to make sure that your objectives are aligned with your business or your, your business policy or ethical policies, right? So, for example, social platforms have run into issues where algorithms are designed to optimize for engagement, and this ends up having a result of harmful content servicing. And this happens because there's not metrics and guardrails to make sure that the models align with, ethical and business objectives, not just short-term revenue or engagement. So you want to make sure that you have guardrails that are ensuring that your models are keeping alignment with ethical and business objectives, not just trying to generate revenue or engagement. Um, and then also failure to audit. Make sure that you have mechanisms in place to audit the results of your AI models to make sure they're not leading to unintended consequences or creating unfair biases against users. Take that cost into consideration when you're deploying your AI models. So, what are some of the key takeaways of today's presentation? First, scale products with data to inform product decisions and foster inclusivity. Don't forget that there's no such thing as the average customer. Who are you not including in your design and objectives, and how can you include them? Make sure that you're scaling your teams while you're scaling your products. Do so with systems and support and accountability. Make sure you're distribute decision making, that you're escalating misalignments quickly, and you're not becoming the bottleneck across your teams. And finally, when you leverage AI, make sure you do so thoughtfully and strategically, focusing on user value and simplicity of the experience. I provided a few resources here based on today's talk that allow you to deepen your knowledge. So blog posts from the product school on AI resources for product managers, the Building for Everyone book. And I also have a couple of artifacts here from Polly Allen, who is a former Amazon AI product manager that I've worked with. And she has great resources, including an AI Career Boost Masterclass, AI Product Leader podcast as well, that I highly recommend. And if you want to dive deeper with me, please reach out, schedule a one-on-one with me on intro.co/Alex Rosales, or reach out to me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful sharing all this knowledge with you, and I hope you found it helpful.